I'd like to talk a bit today about academic censorship. My desire to do so was caused by a recent incident that I'll get to momentarily. Now, I don't like to air dirty laundry in public, so I'm going to keep the personal aspect of this issue to a minimum, but there are some points to be made here that I think are important for our society as a whole and not just for me personally. So the incident that made me decide to make this video was the following. About a month ago, the British outfit known as the Lotus Eaters had a conversation about my book Western Self-Contempt, in which two of their hosts made some very positive comments about the book. When I relayed this information to my publisher, Cornell University Press, so that they could publicize the fact, I was told by the marketing department there, in a rather unconvincing way, if I may say so, that Carl Benjamin, also known online as Sargon of Akkad, was too extreme to be listed as someone who had praised the book. A few weeks later, the co-host, Stelios Panayotou, interviewed me directly about the book, and I put links to both of those conversations below, and he asked me about this and related issues, and this is a little bit what it sounded like.
Okay. Sometimes I would get messages of private support from fellow academics who said, well, we agree with what you're doing, and I would usually tell them, well, if you're not willing to state it publicly, then it doesn't really mean anything to me because it doesn't help in any way. We have to show that there are maybe not a lot of us, but at least some of us within academia who think a particular way or who have these opinions or want to engage in larger projects. And if we state it publicly, then we make it easier for each other. So private messages of support are pretty pointless. But in terms of the publishing process, it was difficult, as you can imagine. Most academic presses would just reject it out of hand when they saw, for example, that Roger Scruton had said something positive about it, because of course that was since he passed away, I believe, in 2020. So I got his blurb, his support, by sending him an earlier draft in manuscript form to get his view and his endorsement. And so I used that, of course, his endorsement as part of the pitch. And of course, the moment people see the name Roger Scruton, they right away say, well, that's not for us. Which is, sorry, did you want to?
No.
And so that was part of it, of course. And part of it is simply people can tell right away that if you have published something in Quillette or in the American Conservative or whatever it may be, then of course you couldn't possibly have anything of value to say. I did go through a peer review process at a different academic press first before I got to Cornell. And the anonymous peer reviews that I got back one of them was all right, but the other one basically called me a fascist. And of course, they're a little too savvy to use that precise word, but you could read between the lines is that that's what the person was saying. And so there was no attempt to engage with the arguments. They just basically said that, okay, this is garbage. And so then I was lucky. I kept searching. Then I finally came to Cornell, where I was lucky because the acquisitions editor for philosophy at Cornell happened to be a more open-minded person. Doesn't necessarily mean she agreed with everything I had to say, but she was more open-minded and was willing to take on the project. But even with Cornell, I've had great difficulty because, as I mentioned, they previously, for example, when I referred your discussion with Carl Benjamin earlier about the book, and I told them for publicity purposes that the two of you had said some positive things about the book, which would have been a great thing because the Lotus Eaters, of course, you have a pretty high profile and you're well known. Exactly, yeah. So a little bit of flattery there, but it happens to be true. I told them that for publicity purposes so that they could appear on Amazon and things like that, so people can see, oh, okay, the Lotus Eaters and Carl Benjamin have said something good about this book, so it might be interesting to buy. They refused to publicize that because they felt that Carl Benjamin was too extreme. I tried to reason with them. Talking now about the marketing department, right? That's separate, of course, from the acquisitions department. The acquisitions department had accepted the book in the first place, but then the marketing department, who's supposed to publicize it, they thought that, no, that was too extreme. We can't do that, even though it means fewer sales. And so this is one example of the sort of difficulty that I've had to deal with, not just with the publishing process, but also with the publicizing process afterwards.
And I'm sure they didn't explain what they meant by that. They just threw that word like that.
Yeah, hiding behind bureaucratic niceties, basically, and saying that, well, we have to watch our brand and so on, and this, it's not going to reflect well on us and so on. But it's their decision what they want to publicize. But They would never, and that's similar to the rejections I got from a lot of philosophy presses. They're too savvy to say right out, basically, that, well, we're on the left and we don't like this sort of thing. So they'll hide behind academic and bureaucratic niceties.
And I may add, they will pretend to be in favor of free exchange of ideas.
Of course, absolutely, at the same time. So we get used to this sort of thing in academia.
This wasn't the first time that my publisher had censored praise. For instance, when the National Association of Scholars, in a positive review of my book, complimented Cornell University Press for championing academic freedom, the marketing department thought that the phrase academic freedom was out of bounds, maybe as some sort of right-wing dog whistle, I'm not sure. But refusing to let praise from Carl Benjamin appear on Amazon or anywhere else was the most egregious such instance, and so that's when I decided to make this video. Now, ultimately, of course, this particular incident is not such a big deal in the grand scheme of things, but it's indicative of something far bigger. Here's another clip about this issue that came up in an interview that I did last year with the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking, although in this case I try to be a bit more positive.
It becomes clear at times that the publication process of it was not very smooth. In the introduction, you also phrase your displeasure with this rather explicitly. Now, I have to say that besides it being a sad confirmation of so many other experienced and confessed stories of betrayal of the core scope of academic publishing, this type of problems, however, touches me deeply. Now, I come from a different background than you, and more than once did I disagree with your book, as with all the other books that have passed the review here at Bookaholics. But that is exactly what I think a book should do, especially philosophical books. I should find points of disagreement, and I should feel uncomfortable at times. Anyway, do you want to say something more about the difficulties you encountered, and maybe also then in the end about the positive fact that your book did see the light of day in the end?
When you send a book like this to academic publishers, so many of them let you know right away that you're not welcome among them, and so most of the time I'd send it to a number of academic publishers, and most of them they don't say it explicitly, also because they don't want it to be on the record why you're being rejected, but it's very clear. You read between the lines, it's very clear that you don't need to bother with such. So if they see the name Roger Scruton, right, who's a famous conservative, of course, they see that he coined this term Oikophobia, right away they're not interested. I don't actually consider myself a conservative, and there are many reasons for that. But obviously there are certain elements in the book that can be called conservative, and so right away they will reject it. So it took a long time to really find people who were willing to support the project. And again,
to engage with the argument, maybe.
Exactly, to engage with the argument, which in and of itself is shouldn't be something unusual, but unfortunately it has become very unusual. Again, like I said, I mean, you and I, as you said, you disagree with certain things in the book, but we're sitting here and having a conversation about it. That's a very unusual thing now.
It used to be the whole point of philosophy.
Right.
Nobody agrees with anybody. That's why you have all the different philosophers.
Exactly. No, I remember this, the philosophy department in Tübingen a few hundred years ago, right? They had one staircase up for the realists and one staircase up for the nominalists, and they didn't talk to each other, right? So it's a typical philosophy thing, but we're supposed to be able to interact anyway.
Exactly.
But yeah, so, and then again, there are also some more personal stories, just about how people refused to engage with it and so on, and how I was not just rejected but insulted in the process on a more personal level. So, so there is all of that. But on the positive side, again, as you say, it did see the light of day in the end, and so and this gives me hope as well, and I hope that anyone who listens who feels frustrated with academia, that it might give them a little bit of hope as well. I found an acquisitions editor at Cornell who was very open-minded, and again did not necessarily agree with everything, but was open-minded enough to be interested in the argument and to engage with it and go through the editing process with me. And Cornell, of course, it is a major university press, and so it's so that was very heartwarming, I have to say.
So as I said, the issue of academic censorship goes far beyond my own professional troubles. As many people know, there is a general atmosphere of censorship that stifles any sense of exploration and empiricism that otherwise promising academics might feel. As I mentioned in the first clip, people are afraid to speak their minds and only show support privately for people like me. But it's the same with this as with anything else. If enough of us speak out about the left-wing takeover of our educational institutions, more people will feel emboldened to join the chorus, and a positive circle will be created. It's especially the people who are already inside of academia who should be speaking out. Unfortunately, left-wing censorship in the academy doesn't only lead to loss to livelihoods and such, but also to a distinctly lower quality of scholarship. And this is not only because some promising academics are excluded from the academy, but also because those who remain dare not deal with certain issues. This last point, in turn, expresses itself in two ways. First of all, and most obviously, it leads to certain issues not being discussed at all. And secondly, it leads to the fact that when an issue is discussed, it is only discussed in a very minute and granular way. Now, what that means is that the scientific or scholarly method of induction slowly collapses. As most of you watching this no doubt know, induction is the process of drawing broader or more general conclusions from a series of particular empirical facts. But the left-wing control of academia today has rendered our universities so politically correct that everyone is afraid to offend. And because everyone is afraid to offend, no one dares to engage in induction. That is, no one dares to make a broader or more sweeping statement, because such statements will always lead to offense and to cancelled careers and so on. And so the quality of scholarship suffers, partly because scholarship avoids certain issues, that's the most obvious point, and partly because it is afraid of induction. Induction is basically dead in our society today, which is a great loss to science and to philosophy. We live in an era that reacts instinctively against any sound generalization as soon as one can find an exception, and such reactions hamper our abilities to make empirically valid inductions. The purpose of empirical observation, which often is to draw more general conclusions from what we observe, therefore collapses. And therefore, in turn, the value of our empirical observations becomes lower and lower, because it has no point anymore, and because we dare not engage in the empirical observation in the first place, because we're afraid where it might lead us. This collapse of induction, and ultimately therefore of empiricism, is a certain sign of our society's slow descent into barbarianism. As I write in chapter 6 of my Western Self-Contempt, with which I started this discussion, empiricism is always a sign of a people that has begun its maturation by moving away from tribal and religious or quasi-religious taboos. Inversely, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, we will recognize the decline of empiricism through an increase of taboos in both the socio-humane and even natural sciences. Now, to be clear, I am not advocating for ideological viewpoints other than the left to conquer academia. If censorship came from the political right, I'd be against that as well. In fact, it's ultimately not so much a question of left or right, but of human nature. Whichever side is in power will always try to censor the upstarts beneath them. That's what human beings are like. But in the present historical moment, it is the left that's in power in our universities, and so it's absolutely clear that the overwhelming majority of censorship incidents in academia today, and for several decades now, come and have come from the left. So I encourage anyone watching this, and especially those of you who are active in academia, to speak your minds, and please to do so in a very public way. That may entail some sacrifice in the here and now, I know that myself all too well, but posterity will be on your side.